Her name was Aria Vance. On New Year's Eve, her phone buzzed, not with congratulations, but with a cold demand from the very people who had brought her into the world. They did not ask how many sleepless nights she had sacrificed to become creative director. They only wanted to know how large her salary was, so they could take half of it. 3 hours earlier, Aria had been standing inside the penthouse apartment she had designed herself, staring at the promotion email glowing on her screen. Her hand trembled slightly. She understood exactly what this moment had cost her. 10 years earlier, Aria had fallen asleep in the library with an old coat folded beneath her head as a pillow. During the day, she studied architecture. At night, she waited tables at a restaurant. Before dawn, she revised drawings for paying clients so she could afford her tuition. No one at the corporation knew that the elegant woman they saw today had once counted every coin before deciding whether she could afford dinner. The doorbell rang. When Aria opened the door, Julian and Sylvia Vance were standing outside with smiles stretched too wide across their faces. Sylvia carried a box containing a cake hastily purchased from a convenience store. Julian held a cheap bottle of wine, even though he was wearing an expensive new overcoat. "Happy belated birthday, sweetheart." Sylvia gave Aria a quick hug, then walked straight into the living room. Her eyes moved across the leather sofa, the glass lamp, and the painting beside the window. She was not admiring them. She was calculating their value. Julian looked at the marble kitchen counter and whistled. "You are living better than we expected." Aria closed the door. She knew that sentence had never been a compliment. It was always the opening line before a demand. Sylvia placed the misshapen cake on the table. She asked about Aria's job, but in less than a minute, the conversation had already shifted to money. Their rent had gone up. Julian's car needed repairs. One of their investments was losing money. Aria listened in silence. Her calmness only made Julian more impatient. He pulled out a sheet of paper, folded in half, and pushed it across the table. "Starting next month, you will transfer 50% of your income into the family account." The air inside the apartment turned rigid. Julian called it an obligation. Sylvia called it gratitude. They spoke about the 18 years they had spent raising her as though Aria's childhood had been a loan that had finally come due. Sylvia said that without them, Aria would never have reached this point in her life. An old memory tore itself open. At 19, Aria had once sat in front of a tuition loan agreement written by Julian himself. He charged her interest every month. Sylvia had stood beside him, saying that adults had to take responsibility for themselves. They forced Aria to sign just as she was about to lose her place at school. After that, she worked 3 jobs to repay her own parents. That had not been help. It had been financial abuse within a family, wrapped in the language of sacrifice. Aria looked at the document in front of her. The fear that had once made her lower her head was now nothing more than a distant echo. She remembered all the times Sylvia had cried to force money out of her. She remembered Julian slamming his fist against the table and calling her an ungrateful daughter. Years of toxic psychological manipulation had taught Aria one important truth. Someone who has been cornered for too long eventually learns how to prepare. "No," Aria said, "one word." Sylvia froze. Julian leaned toward her. "What did you just say?" Aria pushed the paper back across the table. "I will not transfer any money. Not half. Not a single dollar." Sylvia's gentle mask disappeared. Julian shot to his feet, and the chair scraped violently across the floor. He threatened to go to Aria's company and tell everyone that she was a heartless daughter. Sylvia said they would turn the entire family against her. But Aria remained seated. They believed all she had was a beautiful apartment and a large salary. They had no idea that a gray envelope was already waiting inside the desk drawer behind her. And inside it was something that could transform every one of their threats into evidence. Sylvia laughed when she saw Aria walking toward the desk. She thought her daughter had finally surrendered. Julian sat down again and adjusted his collar, wearing the expression of a man who still believed the power in the room belonged to him. They were wrong. Aria opened the drawer, removed a gray envelope, and placed it in the center of the table. Every movement was slow and precise. Her hands did not tremble. Sylvia began to cry. The tears came too quickly, as though she had rehearsed this scene in advance. "I gave birth to you. I sacrificed my entire youth for you. Now you have everything, while your father and I have nothing." Aria did not respond. Her silence frightened Sylvia more than any argument could have. Sylvia changed her tone. Pleading became accusation. Accusation became a threat. She said that if Aria refused to help, she might do something terrible to herself. Julian added that they would go directly to the corporation and tell Aria's colleagues that she had abandoned her parents in poverty. For years, those words had kept Aria awake at night. She had transferred money simply to purchase a few days of peace. She had apologized even when she had done nothing wrong. Every time she tried to establish family boundaries, guilt pulled her back into their control. But tonight was different. Aria opened the envelope. There was no money inside. She removed a stack of notarized documents and pushed them toward Julian. He picked them up, read only the first few lines, and immediately lost the color in his face. It was an agreement terminating all support obligations and establishing complete financial separation between them. It had been signed 4 years earlier. At the time, Aria had been injured in a traffic accident and forced to take several months away from work. Her medical expenses left her with a large amount of credit card debt. Sylvia and Julian had been afraid that her creditors might come after them, so they forced Aria to sign a document confirming that both sides were completely independent financially. They would not be responsible for any of her debts. In return, she would have no financial obligations toward them in the future. Back then, they had viewed the agreement as a shield protecting their assets. Tonight, it became a blade cutting through their greed. Julian threw the documents onto the table. "This means nothing." Aria looked directly at him. "It is legally binding, and you know it." Sylvia stopped crying. She looked at her husband, then back at Aria. For a moment, genuine fear appeared in her eyes. Aria was not finished. She removed another set of papers from the envelope. They were copies of a petition filed with the county court 2 weeks earlier. Sylvia and Julian had requested emergency financial support, claiming that Aria had promised to cover all of their living expenses before suddenly cutting them off. Attached to the petition were dozens of screenshots of text messages. The messages carried Aria's name. But Aria had never sent them. She discovered the scheme when the corporation's attorney received a request to verify her income. Instead of panicking, Aria hired Liam, an attorney who specialized in financial disputes and fraudulent evidence. Together, they traced the phone number listed in the court documents. It differed from Aria's real number by only 1 digit. A disposable SIM card, activated with false information. But its first signal had been transmitted from the neighborhood where Sylvia lived. Sylvia stepped backward. "You are framing me." Aria tapped the screen of her phone. "No. I am protecting myself." Liam entered first, followed by 2 process servers. Julian leaped to his feet. Sylvia gripped the edge of the table. In that instant, they both understood that Aria had not merely discovered their plan. She had prepared a legal counterattack before they ever entered her apartment. One of the process servers stepped forward, clearly stated the names Julian and Sylvia Vance, then placed court summonses directly into their hands. The case accused them of providing false information, fabricating electronic evidence, and deliberately deceiving the judicial system in an attempt to obtain Aria's assets. Julian snatched the papers and flipped through the pages. His hands began to shake. Sylvia turned toward Aria, her face twisted with rage. "Are you trying to send your own parents to prison?" Aria stood upright. Her voice remained calm, but every word fell like stone. "I am not sending anyone to prison. You brought yourselves here when you decided to forge evidence using my name." Julian swung his arm across the table. The cake box crashed onto the floor, white frosting shattered across the stone tiles. The cheap cake they had brought as a prop in their performance of family affection now lay crushed beneath their feet. There were no congratulations left, no more tears, no more disguises. There was only the truth, a gray envelope and the doors of the courthouse waiting to open. On the morning of the hearing, Aria Vance entered the Austin County Courthouse wearing a cream-colored coat and a calm expression that immediately unsettled Julian. He had expected to see a terrified daughter, her head lowered beneath the judgmental stares of relatives and strangers. But the woman standing before him was no longer the 19-year-old college student who had once trembled while signing a tuition loan agreement. Aria sat beside Liam with both hands resting on the table and her eyes fixed straight ahead. She knew her parents would put on a performance. She simply had not expected them to prepare for it so carefully. Sylvia wore an old dress, no makeup, and had deliberately left her hair disheveled. Julian leaned on a cane, even though security footage from only a few days earlier showed him carrying cases of wine into his house without assistance. Before the judge, they presented themselves as two frail, elderly parents abandoned by their wealthy daughter. Sylvia began crying the moment she was asked about their living conditions. She claimed that Aria had promised to send them money every month. She said her daughter had changed after receiving the promotion. According to Sylvia, Aria had become cold and arrogant, cutting off all financial support just as her parents were falling ill. Julian placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. He lowered his head like a husband, struggling to preserve the last of his dignity. "We raised that girl with everything we had," he said. "We are not asking for luxury. We only need enough to survive." Several people in the courtroom turned toward Aria. That was exactly what Sylvia wanted. She did not only want money, she wanted to create a version of the truth in which Aria was the guilty one. She believed that if enough people looked at her daughter with contempt, guilt would tighten around Aria's throat just as it had in the past. But Aria did not lower her head. Liam stood. He did not argue with emotion. He placed the notarized agreement from 4 years earlier before the judge, confirming that Aria and her parents were completely independent from one another financially. Then he presented the bank statements. The courtroom fell silent. The documents proved that Julian and Sylvia owned a rental apartment on the outskirts of Austin. Every month, they continued to receive payments from their tenant. Less than 6 months earlier, they had also collected a substantial insurance payment following property damage. They were not destitute. They simply wanted more. Liam continued by presenting the medical bills Sylvia had submitted. Some belonged to other people. The stamps on the medical documents did not match the hospital's official records. The very day Julian claimed he had been confined to a hospital bed was also the day his credit card had been used at a resort. Julian's face turned gray. Sylvia clenched her fists. She looked at Aria as though her daughter were the one who had betrayed them. But the most devastating evidence had not yet been revealed. Liam asked the technical expert to present the results of the investigation into the phone number used to send the fabricated messages. Records from the service provider showed that the disposable SIM card had been activated near Sylvia's home. It had repeatedly connected to the same device she used every day. There was nowhere left to hide. Sylvia called it a coincidence. Julian insisted that technical evidence could be wrong. His voice grew louder with every sentence, but his anger only caused their carefully constructed image as helpless victims to crack more quickly. Just when everyone believed the presentation was over, Liam called the final witness. Raymond Vance entered the courtroom. Julian froze. Raymond was his older brother, the man who had remained silent through years of family disputes. But this time, he carried an old wooden box. Inside were financial notebooks dating back to Aria's college years. Raymond testified that Aria had supported herself completely from the age of 18. She paid her own tuition, her rent, and even the interest her parents had invented. He also presented records documenting the many times Julian had borrowed money from his daughter and never repaid it. Aria had not abandoned her parents. They had been draining her financially for years. Julian stared at his brother with hatred. Raymond answered only with exhaustion. "Remaining silent for too long is also a form of helping the wrong person," he said. "I do not want to keep doing that." The words caught in Aria's chest. For the first time, someone from her own family had stood before the public and confirmed that she was not selfish. She had only been trying to survive. The judge rejected every request for financial support submitted by Julian and Sylvia. She stated that the fabricated evidence raised serious legal concerns and ordered the case forwarded to prosecutors for review regarding deception of the court and falsification of evidence. Sylvia began crying again. But this time, no one rushed to comfort her. Aria walked out of the courthouse beneath the blazing Texas sunlight. She drew in a long, deep breath. Legal justice could not erase the past, but it had returned to her the right to call the truth by its proper name. Abuse was not love. Walking away from toxic relationships was not betrayal, and overcoming guilt sometimes began with refusing to apologize for saving yourself. A few months after the trial, Aria Vance left the penthouse Sylvia had once examined like a collection of assets waiting to be divided. She did not sell it because she was afraid. She sold it because she no longer wanted to live in a place filled with too many knocks at the door, too many calls in the middle of the night, and the constant feeling that she had to prepare for another invasion. Aria moved into a small house near the Colorado River, outside Bastrop. The house did not have floor-to-ceiling windows or custom lighting imported from Europe. It had only a wooden porch, several old oak trees, and the steady sound of water flowing beyond the garden. For the first time in years, Aria woke without immediately checking her phone. She changed her personal number, closed all of her old accounts, and instructed the company not to share her schedule with anyone claiming to be a relative. Liam helped her complete the necessary procedures to protect her privacy. Every door she had once left open because of guilt was now firmly closed by clear family boundaries. But Julian and Sylvia still tried to cross them. They sent letters through acquaintances. The first envelopes contained apologies. The later ones contained accusations. Sylvia wrote that she could not sleep because she missed her daughter. Julian wrote that a real family must know how to forgive. Not one letter mentioned the fake phone number. Not one letter mentioned the fabricated evidence. Not one letter admitted that they had tried to turn love into a contract for collecting money. Aria placed the letters inside a metal container in the yard. She did not open them. She set them on fire. The paper curled in the small flames. The words turned to ash before they could reach her. Aria stood there watching for a long time. She did not feel victorious. She only felt lighter. Walking away from toxic relationships did not always come with hatred. Sometimes, it was simply the decision to stop giving other people opportunities to destroy the peace you had paid such a high price to obtain. Raymond continued calling Aria every Sunday afternoon. He asked whether she had eaten, whether work was keeping her too busy, and what she had planted in the garden. They were ordinary questions, but to Aria, they carried extraordinary meaning. There were no requests to borrow money. There were no threats. There was no love with conditions attached. Then one day, Raymond was admitted to the hospital. His illness progressed faster than anyone had expected. Aria sat beside his bed during his final days. Raymond did not ask her to forgive Julian on his behalf. He did not pressure her to return to the family. He only told her that he was proud of her for doing what so many people in their family had never possessed the courage to do: live her own life. Raymond passed away on a quiet morning. In his will, he left Aria a small piece of land north of the city. Julian believed it would become a major inheritance. Sylvia even sent word through another person that Raymond's land should be divided among the entire family. Aria did not argue. She sold the land, but the money did not enter her personal account. At the announcement ceremony for a new scholarship fund created for young women whose families controlled them financially, Aria walked onto the stage as hundreds of people applauded. Behind her were two words: financial independence. The fund provided tuition assistance, legal counseling, and temporary housing for people trying to escape financial abuse within their families. No one in the audience knew that the woman standing before them had once worked 3 jobs to repay a debt created by her own parents. They saw only a successful creative director using her real power to create a path for others. Julian and Sylvia had always believed that Aria possessed nothing more than a large salary. They had never understood that her greatest asset was her ability to transform pain into something no one could ever take from her: hope. That afternoon, Aria returned to the house by the river. The wind moved across the porch, carrying the scent of damp grass and the gentle sound of water touching the shore. In her hand was the gray envelope from years earlier, the one that had helped her enter the courtroom without trembling. She had once believed it contained anger, but Aria now understood that there had never been hatred inside it. It contained financial autonomy. It contained legal justice. It contained the right to say no without apologizing. Aria placed the envelope into a small flame and watched its ashes rise into the evening sky. The past had not disappeared. But it no longer controlled her. The river continued to flow. And for the first time in her life, so did Aria. What would you have done if your own parents tried to turn your success into something they were entitled to control? Aria's story reminds us that protecting your peace is not selfish, and setting boundaries does not make you ungrateful. Sometimes, choosing yourself is the first step toward freedom. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Aria was right to take legal action, or should she have given her parents another chance? If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more powerful stories about betrayal, courage, justice, and second chances.